Welcome to Feed Your Lion. I'm Dr. L.I.O.N, and I'm here to aid you in the mastery of total health, spiritual, mental, emotional, physical, and financial. So prepare to have your wellness tank filled up with this podcast. Welcome to another episode of Feed Your Lion podcast. Today's special guest, Dr. Shannon Smith, and like me, she's kind of done the atypical route, starting as a pediatric doctor. So can you tell us a little bit about that, like your background and why you went into medicine in the first place?
Absolutely. First, let me just say, Jodelle, thank you so much for having me. Thank you to your team that makes it happen. I really appreciate that.
Yeah.
So, yes, you and I have similar backgrounds in that I'm guessing we both went into medicine for similar reasons. You really dive in wanting to help people, wanting to see people thrive. And pediatrics ended up being the path I landed on. Really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed connecting with my patients and their families. And one of the things I started seeing early on was how unhealthy our kids were mentally, physically, and the families. And that became a big focus for me. And I share that not only was I noticing in my patients, but I started noticing it in myself. And about 5 years into my practice, I was going through a divorce, about to become a single parent, and all of a sudden you got to look in that mirror pretty hard. And what I was finding out was there were huge issues I was having that were completely ubiquitous throughout society, regardless of economics, race. It's just we all are really struggling with these things. They're societal. And I decided to take my career and focus on finding root causes and going after solutions.
So when you decided to step out of that traditional, like I'm going to work, hospital office, whatever, and I'm going to do this totally separate thing. How scary was that for you? Was that because it took me a while to do that transition, and I was like, man, I don't know how this is going to go, but I don't know what your experience was. I'm curious.
Super scary is definitely a way to put it. And mine was long. I tell everyone, it was a very long transition. So I have physically been out of the office for 5 years. But in many ways, I still consider myself a pediatrician because at the heart of what I do is trying to see children and families thrive. But I think I started my company so my company's probably going on about 10 years. But so it was really struggling along there. But there was a time where I never thought I would physically make that transition. And it was actually COVID that helped me to say, okay, it's time.
Yeah. Actually, that's really funny because I was still working ER. And then when Bellefonte closed, because I was the director at the ER there when they closed, and I went over to the prison because I still wasn't quite ready to even though I was still doing telemedicine and I was doing the office after hours and stuff, but I wasn't quite ready. And then they wanted me even more hours a year later, and I was like, no, it's time for me to do the other. So that's when but it was at COVID time too, and telemedicine boomed. And I was like, I know I can supplement with this telemedicine and do that on my own. And so that was kind of my push, but that went through the roof during COVID. So it's kind of funny how, even in bad things going on, there's good things that come out of that. So I don't know. So, okay. So talk about your business, what exactly you're doing, what your target audience is, how that started and how it's morphed into now.
Okay, great. So, and first I'm going to jump back to what you just said about how good things come out of bad times. I'm such a believer in that. Rockefeller had a similar saying of basically when everyone else is running, run towards, and that's killed the quote there. But it's about looking for those opportunities in the middle of these massive obstacles that we face every day. And I think that's what my business was built around. So initially, it really started when I started finding tools outside of our normal medical regimen. Everything from tapping to mindfulness to meditation to yoga. Yoga was something that was critical to me being able to even feel my own body and really slow down with myself. And none of that you had time for in these 15-minute visits. And so So initially, it started with almost life coaching for kids. That was
Okay.
the very start of where I thought, and I went around and I did some talks at schools,
Okay.
and then I quickly realized that wasn't going to work. If you don't change the environment they're in, the parents,
Yep.
then good luck trying to change the kids. So that's when I moved over to coaching with parents, and then their impact went to the children. And that is still part of our business model. So we have a video series for parents that they can get on, they can watch, they can interact with others, and really implement these tools to start looking at communicate with themselves and others, but also society. Like communicate with how you're dealing with all these purchases that we make and all the crap we're bringing into our homes. So
Yeah.
it's really intentional living.
Yeah.
And so then some of my clients were doing so well that they were showing up at work and their employers started to be like, wait, what happened to you? And that's where companies started hiring me to come in, and organizations and even city governments asking to come in and transform the way they communicate. So in many ways, besides being a leadership strategist, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but it's a communication coach. And basically my job is to have hard conversations, which most people don't put themselves in the middle of conflict. But I think conflict can be constructive, and so often we don't know how to do it, so it ends up being destructive.
Do you think, and this is kind of off topic, but just we have so many like keyboard warriors and social media things. Like, do you think that's hurt like the core of like being able to have a discussion with another human being?
There are so many things causing it hard. Like I'm currently working on an AI enabled app. And one of the features we're looking at is like, say you're on X, which I'm a fan of anyone freedom of speech. Like I want people to be able to say what they want. I absolutely do. But when someone calls you a name, it actually lights up a part of your brain that I'm sure you know, the amygdala, and it makes you harder to understand what they said. So I almost want to put a filter over something like X. So it still says the point, but removes the word jerk out of it. Or these words that aren't
censors
useful.
it a little bit. Yes.
Yeah, so that we can still have those conversations, because it is hard. I've been attacked online before, and the first time it happened, it was so bad and they're just words. They're just keywords, ones and zeros typed in, but wow, did it hurt. And I started to shut down, and my husband had to come to me and be like, hey, Shannon, if you're going to be in the public eye,
this is what's going to happen.
Yeah, we gotta toughen up here. And it's hard, but it definitely makes it harder. And at the same time, I think we get to build resilience
100%
through those.
Yeah. And it's funny too, like going back to what you were talking about with the hospital stuff, you know, the ER was like, which I love the people I worked with. Like, I love that I have the background of ER and that I did it several years, because you can't teach some of those things. You know what I mean? But I'm telling you that the toxicity and just like the general public, anybody that's worked with the general public, and I'm like, man, and they're coming to you on bad days. It's not like they're having a good day, but I was like, we are doing so little to fix any of the core issues that are going on, because first of all, physically, a lot of these things in our medicine system, we're just band-aiding things, or we're promoting a lot of pharmaceutical companies and their billions of dollars. We're not fixing core root issues, which is why I liked functional health. I was drawn to that side so much, because we weren't doing that. We weren't looking at a whole person aspect at all. Their spiritual, their mental, their emotional, their relationships, their finances, like all of these things make a whole person. So again, going back to the commonality of that, like I just like, I understand exactly, because there's definitely, there's positives, but there's a lot of negatives about the current system that need work.
Absolutely. Band-aids is a word that I would, you nailed it. I felt like I was putting Band-aids on gushing wounds, and my heart couldn't take it anymore.
Same. Yep.
But being able to break free of that system took an incredibly strategic plan.
Yes.
I could not have done it as a single mom. I just,
Yes.
you know, or at least it would have taken me an amount of time that I wasn't willing. So
To give, yeah, 100%. So, okay, going back to like, what are some of the things you took like from medicine to your work? Like, were there things that you saw that, hey, this is really going to aid me in my business, and things that you're like, I'm going to leave this and do this differently?
So I think you're asking if what I took away from my pediatric office or my pediatrics training that I was able to carry over with me.
Yeah.
That's a great question because it's not something I've thought about a lot, but there's so much.
Yeah.
There's everything from how you might come up with a differential diagnosis, and then talking and connecting with families and building relationships over years. I would, and then building relationships with all these people you work with and seeing how a corporation is run and seeing how they interact with each other. But one of my biggest things I feel like I took away was that I was in a room with people that I would have never been in a room for really long periods of time and really watching their lives unfold to see how that economic piece or I like to share I was absolutely in the middle of the opioid epidemic in Huntington. I just saw families absolutely crushed and saw it impact everyone in the entire community.
100%.
So, or I saw when they came in and implemented the pain scale that's actually still used today, and then only later to find out it was brought on by a pharmaceutical company and putting it out there. They say that the pharmaceutical companies or whoever, what corporations don't need to be right, they just need to be loud.
That's so true. That's true in politics and anything else too. I mean, or even if you want to take it to business, it's not the best product. Who's the best known, right? Like who has the biggest voice?
Marketing. It's all
it's marketing. Yep. So going back to communication, what are some common things that you see that on a day-to-day basis are working with clients that some common miscommunication things and how do they go about working on those?
Okay, so great question. So there are common miscommunications because I have tools that I share almost like a toolbox.
Yeah.
One of them is pausing. So often we feel like we have to be filling in the space or we need to answer the question quickly. And I think some of that comes from our school system of let's answer that fast, let's move on to the next thing versus no, let's pause and let's take a bunch of guesses and let's have fun versus trying to be right. And so often in our conversations, we're trying to be right instead of curious. So that's a big one. And I have a 4-step tool in that. The second step in that tool after pause is acknowledge. I think we forget to acknowledge each other. And that was something I really could have used before having patient interactions. And we don't, remind me where you went to med school.
OU.
Okay. So I didn't get a lot of that, and these schools are doing the best they can trying to get the information and somebody else makes what they need to do. But learning that when someone says, I'm hurting, to just say, I hear you, or I'm sitting here with you, that word. And even in ourselves when we're struggling to be like, I hear you.
Yeah.
And so, and that moves on to another phase of really just acknowledging our feelings. I think most of us don't know what we're feeling. And the first time a therapist showed me a big emotion wheel, which now all my clients have, and I love giving these to CEOs, and I'm like, how do you feel? And they say the same thing that I said when a therapist gave me that, good. And it's like, nope, that's not on that emotion wheel. You got to pick one. Yeah. But I totally was like, what do you mean I have to pick another word? I don't, and it's so funny. I've never had a CEO not say the same thing back to me. I'm good. Okay. Because we don't acknowledge ourselves and we don't really listen. And so then we're not truly present. So that's just a foundational piece, let alone I have other tools for how to ask what you want, or how to structure a hard conversation with somebody, or how to structure a conversation when someone comes at you with a hard piece of information. So,
well, I love that because one, you're talking about and acknowledging somebody else. You're just talking about empathy.
Yes.
And we don't have that as much. You know what I mean? And there's so much of, I think, societal pressure, especially when you're in more of an authoritative position. You're kind of taught, and I know females don't have this as bad as men typically, but even for me, I have a really hard time showing emotion. It's just, you feel like you have to be strong. Everybody's looking to you to make decisions or do something so it's really hard to take a step back. And when you're not doing it for yourself, it's hard to do that sometimes with other people, I feel like.
Well, that's a really valid point, especially I think as women in a workplace. we want to make sure we're not
Being
showing
over-
emotions in a way that don't work. But showing versus acknowledging, when you start studying the science, your brain isn't even lit up in a place where you can think deeply if you don't acknowledge.
Yeah.
It's still lit up in the amygdala, that fight, or freeze. And so therefore learning to not numb. And I mean, I think the majority of people numb. When I dive in and really study this and look for that root, which is where like my focus has been, I think our society as a whole has had to numb.
So do you think it's like with that, just starting to recognize those things, like starting to like put that into practice? Like, okay, I physically say to myself before I walk into a room or before I enter a conversation, make sure that I'm doing this. Like, is it just like, how do you start that habit, I guess, you know?
Okay. So great question. It's absolutely, all habits go up on an exponential curve. So they're really tiny bits. And so like I have my clients have papers like printed on their desk of how to have a hard conversation, or my technique of pause, acknowledge, question, decide. So they're constantly thinking, did I hit that point? But as we develop this AI tool, the goal is going to be wearables. So your Whoop or your iPhone will give direct feedback, and we're looking to integrate into glasses or to contact lenses. So it says pause.
Wow.
Breathe. Yeah, really cool stuff. Like, think about parenting little kids.
Man, AI
how
is changing
transformative
everything.
It is. I'm most giddy for it, for how we speak to children. Birth to 7 determines a lot of that wiring. And I mean, how many times I looked at my kids, I'm embarrassed to say, to be like, oh, what's wrong? Why did you do that?
Yeah.
Versus just stop talking, Shannon.
Well, you know what? It's funny too. I was just listening to a book this morning. John Bishop, he's got a few out, and he's pretty good. And I love listening to him because he's got a Scottish accent, and it's just it's fun to listen to. But anyways, he was talking about how when we're young and just born, you're a sponge, right? You're soaking up everything, and at some point as you get older, you kind of harden up that sponge and whatever you have like collected through those younger years. So it's kind of in the same line with what you just said. Like, you're making such an impact early on, and now that we're developing these tools, technology can be really cool. AI is going to change, I think,
Everything.
I mean, there's so many AI. I want to get to an AI conference, but like, I think it's really in 10 years, we're going to be seeing a completely different, even before that. But I just think
It's coming at us so fast, it's hard to see.
Yes. I mean, every system, every process, every type of business is all changing with it. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see where that all goes. But let's move for a second to the leadership piece that you're doing. So talk a little bit about that, because you're working with big companies. You're talking to CEOs. I mean, how does that? Is that all in the same package with the communication? Is that separate trainings? How are you doing that?
It is just different emphasis. So it's all in the same package, but different emphasis. And the word leader is almost one that I'm not super comfortable with. And there's a John Quincy Adams quote that if you inspire others to learn more, be more, do more, and act more, then you're a leader. And so I always like to tie it into, we're all influencing people. We are all leaders.
Yeah.
And so really the leader part came from that, but strategist is what I think I'm deep down most passionate about. And communication is just a tool for that strategy. And so when I talk about that, this is going to make you laugh a little bit. I didn't think I was smart enough to go into business, so I became a doctor in many ways, because as a doctor, you learn to memorize. In many ways, you are a soldier. And I think doing an ER residency or doing a lot of these things, you end up learning to be a lot more strategic. As a pediatrician, there's definitely strategy involved, but for the most part, you are working off of an algorithm that someone else made, where you're forgetting to kind of question who paid for this study, and so when that point in my career hit, that I was really like, there's a really big problem here.
Yeah.
How do you even figure out? How do you even look that deeply? And it was like, how do you solve a big problem?
Yeah.
And that's where I started diving in, reading, going to conferences, being like, I don't even know how to think that way.
Yeah. So you mean like, not even like, I mean, because sometimes we take studies at face value, but not diving into things like who's financially
Yeah.
Like funding.
What's their ability to hide data?
What's-
What's their incentives? What's like all these things? I've been really diving in a lot more to global economics over the past 10 years, and I
interesting.
never would have ever seen myself
Yeah.
in that position. But it's all information. Money is just a communication tool.
Yeah.
But jumping back to the strategy part, I had to actually come up with an algorithm of how to solve a problem.
Yeah.
So part of my program is current state, desired state, root cause, hypothesize, test. So it's the scientific model, but you can do it in anything in your life.
100%.
It could be used for dating. It could be used for where
Yeah.
your company is. It could be, and that's what I ended up being like, okay, I have these kids. They look like this. Here's what we want. We want them seeing this potential I can see in them. We want them thriving. What's the root cause? And then really diving and coming at where I feel one of the biggest root causes of all society, which in my opinion is trauma. And not trauma when we think about it as a car wreck, but more the medical term of trauma from Gabor Mate, which is it's not what happened to you. It's if you were alone or felt abandoned, how your brain wired to remove you away from connection.
And that, I think that's a misunderstanding too. People think like when they hear the word trauma that it has to be some like
Catastrophic.
yes, huge like event, and it doesn't. It can be small things that some people might not even recognize. Like you left your kid at the grocery store when they were small. They were alone for a few minutes. Maybe that stuck with them. Maybe that had a profound impact on them.
Time out.
You know what I mean?
Time out. The
Yeah.
thing that we told all parents to do, time out, is incredibly traumatic. It should not be used. Numerous studies are telling you you misbehaved. You are separate from me. You shouldn't be near me. You need to be over there. And there's so many better techniques.
So what do
say
you
connection.
recommend for that for parents who are hearing this?
So many different things, but including just, acknowledging them. Let's sit down together. I see you're having a hard time. Let's see you're having a hard moment. Letting them draw to connect with their own self, or just letting them feel their emotions. Be angry. I think we have this thing where you shouldn't cry. You shouldn't throw a tantrum. Like, have at it. Let me have you do your thing, and then we'll connect. We'll reconnect afterwards. But this control we feel the need to have over children instead of allowing them to be children and removing some of these huge expectations off of them.
Wow. I think that's going to be a powerful statement for some people, because I don't think a lot of people have heard that before, to be honest. That's something I haven't heard talked about a lot, to be honest. And I'm not in the kids circle.
Yeah.
I don't have kids, but I think that's really good information. But so these traumas, regardless of how, maybe it doesn't seem like a big thing to somebody else, but it is. How does that impact the brain? How does that lead to problems in an adulthood?
Yeah. So again, I wish there was a better word for trauma. My husband always
Yeah.
says that. He's like, because I can see where people associate with the car wreck, but you're absolutely right. These little things.
Yeah.
So basically the brain says, I'm going to keep you safe. No problem, sister. Let me back you away from everybody.
Yeah.
Well, all of health and humanity is connection. We were here to connect. You didn't get your cup of coffee or your cup of tea without going through tens of thousands of people,
Right.
between who made the roads, between who made all of it. And we are deeply meant for connection. That's how we grew in tribes. And the trauma that we're talking about here is the opposite of connection. It's disconnection. So you become isolated, depressed, anxious, feel out of control, overwhelmed. You quit being connected to yourself and others.
Do you think that it was the same way, like you talked about, like our ancestors or back in the day? I mean, for them, the brain was wired that way because if we're running away from a tiger or
Absolutely.
something, we need to get, we need to go. But do you think that we have evolved any with, again, technology or, electric, water, all these things that people didn't have? Do you think it's changed? I know that's probably a kind of a big question, but do you think it's kind of evolved the human brain, or are we still stuck back in, are we still going back to our, ancestor days with these things?
It's a great question. And I actually talk about this in any of my workshops I do. I like to start way back then
Yeah.
to understand that we were all in tribes of 200. We deeply were connected there. And modern time is not just changing, it's changing exponentially faster. And so our brain's ability to keep up is not there. It's just not. And so giving ourselves grace, as well as those little ones running around, to say, okay, how can we do it differently, and lean into curiosity versus this constant, let's be right, the science is settled, whatever these sayings of, like, that's not how science works. It's not settled. You have to keep talking. You get to keep talking about these things and looking for ways to help our communities, because there's some really big problems out there, as we can see.
Yeah. So why do you think people feel the need to like have that much control? Is it like an expectation that we have that we try to put on our kids or other people, or what is that? Like, why do we do that? Is it like are we scared? Are we, liking people to fit a certain mold, because I think a lot of people do that. They want to keep people in certain molds, they don't
They do. They do, and for good reason. The reason is it takes extra energy to analyze when people change behaviors. So your goal of your brain is to use less energy, and therefore it wants to summarize the information as quickly and put it in boxes as quickly. And so especially when you're overwhelmed, you're doing a ton, your brain is like, again, I gotcha. Let me put that in a tiny box, and it upsets. So anytime, say I'm working with a client on changing the way they communicate, I teach them that expect others around you to get worse. If when you change how you change with a child or with an employee, you can expect an uptick in the behavior for around 2 weeks because their brain is frustrated it's been asked to use extra information.
Because our brains are meant for pattern recognition.
Love patterns.
That's why you can look at, words that are missing, and you can, because your brain is great at that. But you're right, trying to take in things that don't mess with the pattern or don't stick with the pattern is difficult.
That's right.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so moving along here, you had sent me a question before, and you said you think a lot of people are solving problems wrong.
Yes.
Can you explain a little bit about that and what you mean by that?
Absolutely. I think we're not going after root causes. So just to give us an example, I'm a big animal lover. I worked with numerous groups in the area. We got plenty of animals. And I absolutely want to see animals do well. And we have a shelter here. And there is some people pretty upset about funding for the shelter in Huntington right now. And I can understand that. I can also recognize that we're not solving the root problem. Like, what about if we put the attention to making sure these animals aren't breeding, the problem's not continuing, and we're not focusing on, hey, let's take care of the animals that are out there versus, wait, let's get to the root of it. So like, that's one idea. And then the other is that we don't understand there's only so many resources. You cannot do everything. And so, like, sometimes people will have the abortion discussion with me, and I won't go deep on that at all, but I like to say, you know how many foster kids we have right now? We have, my husband was the founder of NECO.
I didn't know that. Okay.
So, and that's a pretty good story. And when I went looking for a husband, a business partner, I actually had a spreadsheet when I dated looking.
That is awesome.
Because I had this idea and I knew I had to bring it to fruition.
That's hilarious.
I dated for almost 5 years before I met him. And on like our third date, I said, this is what I want to build. And he said, I can absolutely build that for you. And he has been absolutely true to his word. He was the CFO and CTIO, and he left there and has continued to help me build this. So and understanding the foster care system more from his perspective too. I saw someone put an ad out during the Super Bowl, and it said something crazy like, we have like 18 stadium fulls of foster children right now in our country as everyone was watching the Super Bowl. And it's like, here we are fighting over some of these other things, and we're like, these kids are here right now. Like, let's take all of our resources and help these children. Let's figure out the root to these kids going into it, which I believe a huge portion is trauma, and that's from numerous different causes. But let's go after and really see where our money's going, because so many people will call me and be like, oh, I think the school should be doing this. I think the school should be doing this. And they don't realize the school's going bankrupt. And so we really have to sit back and prioritize. And I think we're forgetting to do that when solving problems.
Oh, there's so much. So even going back to like root cause, like I was like really attracted to functional medicine. I'm in a nutrition functional medicine program now. That's what I'm doing because,
Excellent.
I like the philosophy so much better. And we talk about that. You have this faucet that's running and it's overflowing. And what are we doing? We're cleaning up the puddles on the floor while the faucet continues to spew. And I think that's a great like visual
Yes.
of what that looks like. And we do that in so many things. If you look at health, we have these chronic conditions, but we're not addressing, eating whole foods, exercise, movement, all the things that can eliminate these problems.
Root cause.
These are the root causes. Instead, we're throwing medicines at trying to get the sugar right or whatever it may be. But that's just one example of like hundreds. But it's a problem throughout society.
Yes.
And I don't, and I'll have to ask you about why you think that we do this, like why we don't attack that, that initial, like, are we blind to it, or do we just not want to address like the foundation being wrong? I mean, what do you think the actual problem is? There's other things I want to say to what you were talking about, but what do you think the problem is with that first? Like,
so this is a great question because I've been looking at this for a long time, and our system is set up to incentivize certain things and not set up to incentivize others. I hear so many people be like, money's evil or companies are evil, and I think that's looking at it in a not useful way versus companies are set up and these are their incentives. Understand that. This is money, our current currency, our current economic, and these are the pros and cons.
Yeah.
And before I understood businesses, I was like, of course they wouldn't cheat you. Of course they wouldn't make it. And I remember my husband looked at me and said, I don't understand what you don't understand about capitalism. and it was great because he speaks to me in that way that doesn't trigger my amygdala and helps me be like, oh, what? Like to understand that CEO of, say, Pfizer, he has an obligation to his shareholders, period, the end. It's called a fiduciary duty. Therefore, if he does not increase profits, he's out and the next person is in. Therefore, their goal in no way is to go after, wait, how are those foods? Heck, in their financial model, we are incentivizing crappy foods to give us medicine. Yeah. So then the ultimate question becomes, well, why aren't our governments? And then we have to go, well, wait, what are our governments actually for?
Right.
Really, they're just supposed to be distributing finite resources,
right?
Which is where we get into money. But then unfortunately, most of our organizations, how do they hold up to pressures of trillion-dollar companies? Those pressures are real, and people are humans. And if we're not creating transparency and we're not holding individuals accountable, which is absolutely what's not happening in these corporations, so the incentives and the accountability are not aligned.
Well, I was just in a conference. I was just at a business conference in Vegas. I just got back like last night or the night before, and we had an economics guy. We had a bunch of billion-dollar business owners, there. And it's always interesting to hear them talk about these things because even the economics guys, if they were getting into things like term limits, they're not incentivized to get in and solve problems. It was never, when our country was founded, we weren't even made for these like long-term, lifelong politicians. That was never it. People were working their farms. People were working, they would come and do their job for a couple months or whatever it was when it was in session, and they would go back to their lives.
Yeah.
Now we have people that are just in there, they're making a career out of this, and it's not serving the people, right? Like, so it's the same thing. Where's the incentive at? If you change that a little bit, it might be a completely different look for like politicians, right? Like, yes. So, and that's just one example, but it was fresh because we had just talked about this, and it's kind of along the lines of what you were saying. And remind me before you leave, I'll have to show you. We have about 10 cats outside we take care of right now. I don't know, you've probably seen my St. Bernard Husky, but they're up here too. But we have a little farm in the city on our own. But and going back to what you were saying with Necco, I think a lot of people are afraid of the foster care system. And this is just some conversation because we've actually looked into the foster care, like maybe doing some fostering, but we'd want to do the fostering to adopt. For me, I couldn't personally like have a kid for a while and see him get ripped away. I mean, that's like heart wrenching, right? If you're like, for me, it would be. But I think a lot of people, and from conversations I've had, are scared of that system because one, there is so much and like more significant trauma in a lot of these kids. They've been through a lot. There's like, higher amounts of like behavioral issues and things that people just don't feel like equipped or that they can handle. And, again, we don't have systems in this place that promote like healing with that, I don't think, right? We're putting these kids back and forth, like always wanting to reunite them with their parents, even if they're like still on drugs or whatever else. And that's from my standpoint what I've seen. I don't know with your husband what his like, because he's obviously had more experience, but these are just conversations.
Yeah. It's so tough. Like I really got, like I was on my high horse when I met him. I was like, how is this being done? And he was like, Shannon, you don't understand. We don't make the policies. Like the policies are made and we have to chase them.
Yeah.
I'll tell you something that's going to blow your mind right now that I learned from him. Do you know companies like, because NECO's just a company like many of them in this space, they're not incentivized to get people to adopt. They actually lose money if you adopt. So, and I don't know if anyone's ever shared that publicly, but I'm sharing it because these are the type of things.
I never heard that.
These are the type of things that people aren't sitting down thinking, what do we want? That's that desired state. And how do we incentivize that? And then this isn't in any way a company like NECO's fault at all, but like I'm a big believer in breath work, in tapping. I have seen what it does in many other modalities. They're not paid for with our current system. So if like I came to Stephen and I was like, oh, the kids need this and this. And he was like, how am I going to pay for that, Shannon? And I'm like, that magical pot of money, because I didn't understand business then. And it doesn't work that way. Now, I do think they're really trying, and NECO's probably one of the better ones out there as far as trying to align with the system. It's just such a mess.
Yeah.
And going back to the waterfall, the water coming out of your sink analogy, more and more children are being poured in, and it's heartbreaking because I'm sure you've met children, like there's just so much potential in every one of them. Every one of them, you're like, gosh, we need your light.
Yeah, and I think I just have to put this out there too. The Super Bowl, the 18,000 stands.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of interesting too because the Super Bowl is like the number one sex trafficked event in the United States.
Really?
Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
It's the number one, and it's like I forget how many thousands, but during like Super Bowl, like it's like, and actually the Kentucky Derby is one of the second or third.
That hurts my brain.
Is that crazy?
That just tells you how traumatized humans are. Like I used to hate, I was in rooms with people that did unspeakable crimes, as a pediatrician, and I used to hate, and I can still hate the crime. I no longer hate the people because I've really come to see that these are incredibly traumatized people, and I want us to heal. As a society.
Hurt other people.
Hurt people, 100%. And so I'll talk to some people and they'll almost think I'm a little demented because I don't want to hate. But to me, that continues
it's a
the
cycle. 100%. All right. So we've kind of gone down that rabbit hole, but let's move on a little bit to money.
Okay. Before we jump into money,
okay.
Can I ask you one quick question?
Yes.
Just because I'm so pumped about this person, do you have a favorite politician? And the reason I'm asking is because there is a politician in Kentucky that to me is I'm so grateful he is part of our country.
Are you talking about this guy over here?
Thomas Massey.
Okay, yeah.
I think that you guys are so lucky to have him here.
Thomas,
he is somebody that thinks
No,
so
I've heard
strategically.
nothing. I've heard good things about Thomas Massey.
Just
I've
when-
never
yeah.
met him, but I've heard really good things about him.
I've not met him in person, but he interacts with my posts on X.
Does he really?
Yeah,
I love that.
But when you were talking about one of my favorite biographies was about President Garfield.
Yeah.
And to understand what politicians were like back then. And when you were talking about coming in and out of the farm, and when I see Thomas Massey, like, I'm just like, oh my gosh, there's hope. There's like a ray of hope out there. This guy who's an MIT, guy that has all this brain, and he's in our political system. But you also, to me, it also gives me a glimpse of, we want to be like, I hate all politicians. And it's just such a, like, I want to look at people when they say that, and I'm like, are you running? Like, what are you doing?
No,
you know?
I honestly, like, I am really, like, far removed from this is really bad. Like, I do my civic duty, and I'll go do my research and vote, but I really, like, I'm like I do not watch any news. Like, I try, it's so negative, and it's so, like, they're very one-sided on whatever thing, and so I just try to stay away from that and try to go to, like, legitimate sources so I don't really, like, can't say I have a favorite, like, right now. And, like, I always tend to vote, like, at least the last few I've been, like, so independent, even though that doesn't, like, help anything. But I'm like, no, I'm just, like, if I can't in good conscience, like, do something, I'll like, write in the underdog, or, I tend to be a lot of, like, libertarian in a lot of views because I like government limited. I think that it should be economics, defense and foreign affairs only. And I think that really what should be left to the people can be left to the people. And
absolutely.
And I've always kind of been like that. I don't like big government interference and things. You
can't solve problems that big.
No.
Like, that's where during COVID, I presented at the Cabell County Medical Society early on, to be like, something's not right here.
Yeah.
And, like, we need to be asking questions. And I put up one slide that was how just an organization gets paid in the medical system. And it was such a mess. Like, you're like, what? Like, how are we solving problems? I only brought that up because we're in Kentucky. And I think it is just such... I like to see anybody out there with the right heart trying to get involved and who understands how to solve problems. And I think engineers think that way naturally. Like, no engineer would be like, let me fix the earth right now. Like, they'd be like, you can't fix that big.
I had thought about writing a book about, like, this kind of subject, just being like, like, how do you solve problems? Well, you get the brightest minds on the subject in the room. You sit them down and you let them write out some good solutions that make sense, and then you let people vote on them. You know what I mean? You leave out the greed and the money factors or the incentivized stuff. You just let people that are actually, like, intelligent and what the area you're talking about is, and you let them come up with some realistic solutions that are explainable, and then you let people vote. And I think a lot of things you could do that way, but we have too many conflicting interests.
And that, when you have a product to sell, you're gonna make it fit. And that's just how business works.
Yes.
So sorry, thank you for letting me go off on that.
I love it. No, anytime you want. This is a great podcast for going down the rabbit hole, because I don't like to limit or constrain. Like, that's where ideals should flow, and I think creativity needs to be able to flow. So
absolutely,
I don't like stopping things. But you talk about, like, you work with finances with people too, right? Okay, so with money is, like, what, one of the top 3 for ending marriages, right?
Absolutely.
So what are some of the things you're seeing? What are some, like, tools you offer in that area?
Okay, so going back to, how in the world is a pediatrician giving in any way financial guidance? And it really goes back to me dating. Like, I remember when it was even time for my 401k, I was like, none of this makes sense to me. I don't understand it. Doctors have no financial. So on that dating I wanted somebody that understood money deeply.
What was all on your spreadsheet? I have to take a side, because I'm a spreadsheet junkie. So this is hilarious to me. I have spreadsheets for everything. So
I love it. And now I actually have a separate program for people that are dating, because it worked so well. It was a system. So I had things that you didn't think about before you got in a divorce, like honesty. Okay. Honesty. And trying to let that person show who they are versus make. I had yoga. One of my biggest was they had to be a fan of Seinfeld. I just knew I couldn't do another marriage where like couldn't. And my husband to this day, we might be like in an argument and he just drops a Seinfeld line and like I have a bigger, we're in a tense moment and he drops a Seinfeld line and everything's fine.
That is funny. Okay.
Yeah.
I love it.
So, and even other things like jogging, but one of them was absolutely to understand money deeply. So, so I had dated like venture capitalists in Chicago and none of them could really answer my questions. And Stephen was just, anyone that kind of talks to him was like, oh, I get it. You married a savant. And I'm like, I did. And he and we nerd out constantly. We're constantly reading books and our hot tub. We go for like a hot tub and we take a walk every day.
Yeah.
And on those, we talk about business or talk about what we've learned. And that's, again, part of my dream when I was dating.
I love that.
So, he really helped me to see money is just a form of communication. It's supposed to communicate work over time. And so essentially our value. And when I looked at the national debt, like that was something I would see on the news as a kid growing up. And I'm like, that doesn't make sense. Like, how can you have this debt? And now, like, I really got to understand that it's actually part of our current financial system. If they actually solved the financial debt, we would be in a horrible mess. Mm-hmm. So we don't even understand that debt is part of it. It's just gotten completely out of control.
Yep.
Like the fact that most people don't realize, and I hope your listeners really enjoy this fact. I shared this, and I did 3 workshops last week, all in at the Charleston Civic Center. Every one of them, I had to drop this fact. Do you know how much we're going into debt every hour?
Oh gosh, I don't even want to guess.
Okay, any guesses? 260 million
every
hour.
I would have been close. I was going to say around 175, but okay, yeah.
That's mind-boggling. That's a mind-boggling number.
Yeah.
And what people don't understand is that means if you have $10,000 in your savings account, every second it's becoming worth less. And so people are all in arms, like all these things cost more, how dare eggs cost more, all these things. Those things don't cost more. Your dollar is becoming worth less.
Every time they're printing and doing more, it's inflation. Like that's
and debasement of the currency.
Yes.
It's inflation and debasement of the currency.
Yes.
And that's what's happening. And so we're seeing the when we say the rich get richer, really it's like these corporations that are just raking in a senseless amount of money on the backs of literally everyone else. But that's the system. And that's why we have to stand up and be like, no, this isn't okay.
Yeah.
And our new economic model needs to be more community driven. Mm-hmm. So I recently got into a conversation with someone online where they were like, no, these people should be covered. They need money. We cannot cut programs. I would love to see those people or other people or these people. The problem is what we don't recognize is every time we print to give to those people, we are hurting all these people, everyone else in other countries.
Yeah.
Our family went to El Salvador. So we have 3 children. It's like, they're just truly what drives me every day. And we have 2 17-year-old daughters and a 15-year-old son. And we all 5 went to El Salvador to study their economy this summer because Bitcoin is their national currency. So to see how it was working and what that looks like in real time, because they get to hear us all the time talking about global economics, which again was never something I grew up hearing. I grew up hearing save every penny you have, wear the same shoes for 15 years, which I still like wash out baggies and tinfoil. I totally do. Some days my husband's like, when are you going to stop that? And I'm like, it makes me feel good. But to understand that our economy is crushing people and we're pointing at each other and blaming each other.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have to say that when you said the baggy thing, Jimmy John was one of the speakers, the Jimmy John guy.
Oh, okay.
And he was talking about how on his like plane he still had napkins that he would take from other places, just to have like because he grew up like poor, and he was like, that's still in my, I don't like waste that, so it's funny, like there's still those habits
that is so great, because I can promise you I have some Jimmy John's napkins on my counter right now in where my napkins.
He was like talking about there's like Taco Bell or Arby's napkins on my plane, like.
That's so great. Anyways. What an interesting. Now I have to go back and listen to that episode.
It's anyways, but it was interesting. But so Bitcoin.
Okay.
That is quite the talk, and blockchain and all this stuff. I mean, and I think a lot of people are like, I have no idea about any of this. Now, I'm kind of mad I didn't listen to my brother back in the day. He's an internet guy, like programmer type.
Yeah.
And he told me 20 years ago, get some Bitcoin. And he sold his out 10 years ago. He
Yeah.
would have had a lot of money right
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
But anyways, explain a little bit about how you think that's going to go. Because I honestly, I don't know much about crypto.
Okay.
I need to dive more into it. I know that's becoming, and even the conference I was just at, it's a big real estate thing, and they're doing some hedging with Bitcoin. So they're buying real estate underpriced at 85%. And so they're keeping their stable money in the real estate, but they're doing about 10 to 15% Bitcoin against it, so that they'll have. But I thought that was interesting.
Stephen has a lot of companies reaching out to him right now to figure out how to diversify their portfolio. But okay, so let me start with the basics of Bitcoin. Okay, so we know money is ones and zeros in a computer. And for anyone that doesn't make sense to, when I think of $1 or a $20 bill, literally that doesn't even represent a 4% of what's considered the money out there. The rest of it is all the government pushing buttons in the computer and going, okay, we now have money, and we can get more into detail of that with the Fed and Congress. But regardless, to know that there's all these ones and zeros, no one even knows how much has ever been printed or said as the US dollar. Okay, with that, you have a limited ability to track, and you have continual debasement of the currency and inflation. So in 2008, basically some tech guys, and that's a whole story, but came out talking about, hey, let's create this. So just like any technological advancement, they had a white paper saying, what if we were able to create money that couldn't be duplicated? There was an exact amount, and this is how it would work. And there's an 8-page white paper out there. And the author is Satoshi Nakamoto. Again, big story, fun story there. But all it is a code that works on the back of something called blockchain technology, which was created at MIT in the early 2000s. And basically, it's a way to have money that's completely trackable, that is limited, so therefore it's not going to be debased. They're not making more. There's 21 million. And that it can easily move, and you don't have these third-party people in between taking a piece of it every time you move, like we do now. If I wanted to send you $25 right now, and it's wonderful when you think about it in a country like Africa. If anytime we wanted to send, say, money over to somebody in Africa, we have no idea where it ends up. Or all this money in Ukraine missing. If that had been done on the Bitcoin blockchain, you would actually be able to follow
exactly where it was.
Exactly where it was. And now there is some anonymity, which is really good in the end user. But if you had a government project like trying to fund a war in Ukraine, you would just say, no, we need to know whose bank accounts those are. And you would literally be able to follow the money. And therefore, how many problems would that solve when we could actually see who did fund that study, who was paid for those things? And Bitcoin, people are all caught up in the price. It's I think it's around 90,000 today. But Bitcoin in many ways just represents the dollar's inflation. Bitcoin is meant to be stable. So at one point it will become stable. And the people that are the tech gurus like your brother and the finance gurus, they saw, like for my husband, who was a CFO for 20 years, when he learned about Bitcoin, he was like, oh, this makes sense.
Yeah.
It just like the internet made sense. This makes sense. And so that's what really helped us go down the rabbit hole. So I believe, and there's a documentary called God Bless Bitcoin that I recommend for people to check out. Yeah. But it truly is a tool to help our value shine.
Where is the God Bless?
I think it's free on YouTube.
Okay.
Just Google God Bless Bitcoin.
Okay. Okay. Did you hear about the squirrel thing?
Not sure about that squirrel that was taken.
And they made a coin out of it?
No, I did not know that.
Okay. So my brother told me this story. When I flew back in from Vegas, I stopped and saw them because they live in Circleville. So I stopped from the airport and saw my nephews and my brother. And he tells me the story about there was this lady who had over 1 million followers on Instagram for a pet squirrel she had rescued and a raccoon.
Okay.
Well, apparently, I think they were in New York State, so it was illegal to have the squirrel, but it was a domesticated squirrel. They sent 9 cops to her house or something, and then they killed the squirrel, which caused like an outrage among all the people that followed. So in its honor, they made like a Dogecoin or one of those for the squirrel.
Okay.
So my brother, he put $500 on this. And he sold it 2 hours later for $2,500. So he made $2,000 in 2 hours on it. He told me if he would have held on to it for 2 weeks, he would have made $490,000. That's how much this little squirrel coin went up. All he had to do was hold on to it for 2 weeks, but he sold it in 2 hours.
It's so hard to know what to do.
But anyways, my point in that, which I thought that was hilarious,
yes,
like and ridiculous, like all at the same time. But what about all these other, like they make up all these other, is anything going to be as stable as like Bitcoin, or do you think these other, like, I mean, and because you've studied it more than I have. So
great question. I truly see Bitcoin in its own category. Okay. So see Bitcoin as the foundation of money. Yeah. See all the other cryptos are really companies that are tied, like essentially a company and the stock market combined is how I see a crypto. All the cryptos have someone in charge. Bitcoin has no one in charge. It's an algorithm running on its own. Therefore, it can't be corrupted. But all the others, you got to look at the use cases the same way you would assess a business. So you might come in and be like, okay, what's the viability of that? What's the use? What's the popularity? You know, I was really upset about that squirrel too. Okay. But I definitely didn't go out and buy a coin, but I'm not, but again, the people are right. But if I had bought a coin, I would have wanted to buy it to support them and keep supporting them versus jump in and out. Yeah. And so that's where this whole layer of companies, businesses, and ideas are going to sprout up on the crypto marketplace. But it's all on the foundation of Bitcoin.
Yeah. Well, I think this is great. I mean, like I said, you taught me, so I'm going to go watch that documentary.
God bless Bitcoin.
Yeah, absolutely. But tell people where they can find you, because you're doing so much stuff, and I think you're gonna rock it. You're already rocking it, but I think you're gonna keep growing and growing. So tell people where they can find you if they want to reach out and get a hold of some of your programs and things like that.
Absolutely. So I got my website, which is ownyourfocus.com, and then I have my Facebook page, which as well as Own Your Focus, and then I have a Facebook group called Badass Boss Moms. It's not just for moms. It really is for anyone that wants to birth change. And that's Badass Boss Moms with Dr. Shannon. And then, of course, I'm on TikTok, not much on Instagram. I'm basically wherever my kids kind of direct me to go. But and then I do a lot of speaking engagements. And so you can just follow along on social media to find those. And we will be hopefully launching that AI communication and powered app. I'm really excited for that. But we're going to be coming up with more classes and more books. People keep asking me about the dating one, and I'm like, I want to get that because I couldn't be here today if I hadn't found an incredible partner. You know what an incredible partner does to your life.
100%. That's awesome. Like, you've shared so many gems. Is there anything that we didn't talk? We talked about a lot of stuff, but is there anything that you wanted to hit that we didn't specifically cover?
I will touch on one.
Okay.
Just a reminder that it's up to us. Whether we're talking about health, whether we're talking about finances, whether we're talking about political. It's up to us to pause and slow down and assess ourselves before we point at others, before we do anything else. When I was that single mom that was just hurting, that I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? I had to look in the mirror and be like, no one's coming to save you, girl. Get up and do it.
It kind of even just reminds me of scripture, take the plank out of your eye. I mean, how many times are we pointing fingers at people?
Absolutely.
And there's so much work. We can all and even I've said this, I'm in martial arts, right? And there's a list of our creed things that we say. But one is, I'll give so much time to the improvement of myself that I have no time to criticize others.
Beautiful.
And I love that because it's true. There's always work you can do on yourself. And that creates those ripples you were talking about, right?
Absolutely.
If somebody's wanting to get started and they don't know where to start, they want to improve some things, but they don't know where to start, where do you recommend?
Well, that's where I say the reason I named the company Own Your Focus is because you've got to pick one.
Yeah.
And if say you're I'm worried about my money and I'm worried about my weight, and equally, then it doesn't matter which one you pick, but pick one and stop talking about it.
Get started.
jumping back for a moment, but we talked about nutrition. You talked about, I love that you're going into functional nutrition. That was actually where I kind of had a huge wake-up call in medicine. It's that I knew I had to get healthier if I was going to get out in the dating market. And I took a look at the food pyramid, and I was like, this doesn't even make sense
so
at
wrong.
all.
So wrong.
And that's where things started to unravel, to be like, oh wait, turns out someone can pay to get their products like on there and like pushing it. Like, why are we ever telling like what's in formula? All these things, like, just bizarre when you can step back and see it. And so how I got in shape was I decided I was going to jog my daughter to preschool every morning. And I did it for 2 years. I went to the library and got free books on dating. They were actually audiobooks on tape back then, and popped them in. Like, you don't have to spend money. Like, you move. But that when you're ready to invest in yourself, do it. I invest in myself every day with trainers, coaches, therapists, all of it.
Well, that's even like getting mentors and surrounding yourself with people. Like we talk about all the time, you are the 5 people you're around. So if your groups are like not what you want to be, and that's the people you spend most time with, you might want to look at that too, right? Like
Absolutely.
getting out of that. But you said the food pyramid. We were talking about, now they have the My Plate, and we were looking at the differences in other countries. Like, we still have like milk on there, dairy, where like Canada has water, right? Like,
Interesting.
Oh yeah, and it's we like looked through the whole process. And you've got this like board that's not as encumbered, but then the people actually making the decisions, so many of them are getting paid by these companies. And I'm like, what? Like, it's really insane when you look at like the conflicts of interest.
And you can see how a common person has no way to tap into that, because you trust the expert, which when I'm saying look at yourself, I'm saying listen to yourself.
Listen to your body too. Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for this.
Yeah, no, I love it. But we're going to go ahead, as always. Like I said, I think there's so many gems here and people can dive off any way they want. But Shannon sent me a couple of her favorite quotes here. So we're going to do this. So first one, when there's a problem, start with the assumption that communication is the issue. And then the next one is the single biggest problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place. And that's George Bernard Shaw. Dr. Smith, thank you for being here. We really appreciate it.
Oh, Jodelle, thank you. And I appreciate y'all.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll see you guys the next time.